Now let's talk about the law of syllogism. Let's take a peek at this commercial.
When you pay too much for cable, you feel powerless. When you feel powerless, you want to take the power back. When you want to take the power back, you take karate. When you take karate, you want to use your karate. When you want to use your karate, you become the fist of goodness. When you become the fist of goodness, you run along rooftops. And when you run along rooftops, you fall into a dinner party. Don't fall into a dinner party. Get rid of cable and upgrade to DirecTV. Call 1-800-DirecTV.
This commercial is an example of the law of syllogism. When you pay too much for cable, you feel powerless. You feel powerless, something leads to something else, one thing leads to another, and then you end up falling into a dinner party. One big long story, like the transitive property. The law of syllogism can also be thought of as the transitive property. The law of syllogism uses multiple facts. Let's say you're given one fact, P, if P, then Q. And you're given another fact that links to the first fact. So starting with where that ended off, Q leads to R. The conclusion we can draw from these statements linking together, therefore, P leads to R. It's like linking a chain of events. We take out the middleman, the Q, and we go from where the story began to where the story ended, P, then R. So think of it like link a chain of events. For example, let's use deductive reasoning to determine a valid conclusion to the following statements. Now remember, there's two types of deductive reasoning. We're going to specifically use the type of deductive reasoning called the law of syllogism. Now we may not know that until we read the argument and see how it's being constructed. So let's read. If there are clouds in the sky, then it will rain. If it rains, then I might get wet. So notice the first statement ended with, it rains, and the second statement begins with, it rains. So linking the chain of events, we take the beginning of the argument and link it to the end of the argument. Therefore, if there are clouds in the sky, then I might get wet. Again, linking a chain of events, taking out the it will rain part, and linking the beginning to the very end, like the DirecTV story. Let's look at another example of determining validity. Determine whether the argument is valid or invalid, meaning not valid. Explain your reasoning. If I live in Sterling, then I live in Virginia. If I live in Herndon, then I live in Virginia. Therefore, if I live in Sterling, then I live in Herndon. So if we're using the law of syllogism, if I live in Sterling, then I live in Virginia. The second sentence, the second statement, the one that's going to connect to the first one, should begin with, I live in Virginia. But does it? No, it begins with, I live in Herndon. So these two do not link together. There's no way we can put these together using the law of syllogism. So this is an invalid argument. Why? Well, they're using the converse of this statement. If we were to switch this around and write the converse, if I live in Virginia, then I live in Herndon. Now it would make more sense because this one ends with I live in Virginia, this one begins with I live in Virginia, so we can cross those off. But remember that the converse is not necessarily true, and in this argument, they're trying to use the converse. That's right. Now it's time to make a summary. Compare and contrast. On your note sheet, use your own words to explain the difference between the law of detachment and the law of syllogism. Have fun!